She told the 911 operator that the man in her house was walking on all fours. And then she whispered, "He's climbing the wall now." Nightbound bloodline presence. 5 true scariest real-life horror stories. Every town has its legends. Every stretch of lonely road, every forgotten patch of woods has a story whispered about it. But sometimes, those stories aren't whispered. They're screamed into the night by those who live them. The accounts you're about to hear come from letters, from police reports, from desperate testimonies given by ordinary people who stepped into a world they never believed existed. These are not campfire tales. They are first-hand records of the moment the familiar world cracked, and something else looked through. Our first story comes from a man who learned that the oldest predators are not always the ones we know. Story 1. The Thing in the Fog. My name's not important. Been driving these northern routes since I was a kid riding shotgun with my pop. I've seen black ice that could kill you, whiteout blizzards, moose big as my rig standing in the road. I don't spook easy. I don't believe in UFOs or Bigfoot or any of that nonsense. If I can't hook it to my truck or weigh it on a scale, I don't give it much mind. It was November, a Tuesday, just after 2 a.m. I was on a back highway, cutting through the Chippewa forest to make up time. Thick, pea-soup fog had rolled in off the lakes. I'm talking visibility down to maybe 20 feet beyond my hood. My high beams were just throwing the fog back in my face, so I had the low beams on, crawling along at maybe 25 miles an hour. World was reduced to this little tunnel of asphalt and pine trunks ghosting past. Dead quiet, too. No radio signal, just the hum of my engine and the swish-swish of the wipers. The first thing that was off was the smell. It cut right through the cab's air system. Like wet dog, but sour. Metallic, almost. Like a handful of pennies and old blood. I wrinkled my nose, figured maybe I'd passed a dead deer in the ditch. Then I saw the figure. Up ahead, just at the edge of my headlights, standing in the middle of my lane. My brain filed it as a person, a tall, hunched person in a dark, shaggy coat. I laid on the horn, a long blast. It didn't move. I started hitting the brakes, but on that slick road, I knew I wasn't stopping in time. I'm cursing, gripping the wheel, waiting for the thump. It never came. When I was maybe 10 feet away, the figure flowed to the side. It didn't step. It didn't run. One moment it was center lane, the next it was on the shoulder, but the movement was all wrong. Too smooth, too fast. A blur of long, gray limbs. I caught a flash of it as I passed. It was standing on 2 legs, but its back was arched, like it was carrying a huge weight. Its arms were too long, hanging past its knees, ending in, I want to say hands, but they were twisted, knuckled things. The coat wasn't a coat. It was a pelt. Matted, stringy hair, plastered wet from the fog. And the face. God, the face. It had a snout, but it wasn't a wolf. It was too flat, too wide. The jaw hung open slightly. But the eyes, they weren't animal eyes. They were pale, almost milky white, and they held a cold, calculating intelligence. They tracked me. Didn't blink. Just watched me roll past with this vacant, hungry focus. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I stared into my side mirror, watching those 2 pale dots recede into the fog behind me. And then they vanished. Not faded. Vanished. I pulled over about a mile down the road, shaking so bad I could barely get the parking brake on. I sat there for an hour, just listening to my own breath, staring into that wall of white behind me. I didn't see it again. I didn't want to see it again. But I heard it. A sound came out of the fog, from all around me. A low, chuffing noise, like a heavy breath. And then a knock. Not a branch snapping. A solid, deliberate knock on the trunk of a nearby tree. Then another, from a different direction. Then another, closer. It was circling the truck. Communicating. I don't know with what, or to who, but it was communicating. I threw the rig into gear and didn't stop driving until the sun was up and the fog was a memory. I reported it to the Forest Service the next day. The ranger just nodded, didn't look surprised, and said, You're the third this month. Stick to the interstate, driver. I've driven that route since. In daylight. Never again at night. And I still don't believe in ghost stories. I believe in what I saw. And I know, somewhere in those deep woods, something that shouldn't exist believes in me, too. The account of Main Line stands as a stark reminder that our highways and byways often cut through territories much older than our maps. The fog, it seems, can conceal more than just the road ahead. It can hide the lines between what we know and what we fear. Story 2. The Pale Man on the Wall. What follows is the story of the Miller family. Sarah, a 34-year-old graphic designer, her husband David, and their 6-year-old daughter, Chloe. They were skeptics of the highest order. Their horror did not begin in the wilderness, but in their daughter's playroom. We were the boring house on the block. Seriously, David worked in IT, I worked from home. We paid our taxes, we had a golden retriever named Baxter. We laughed at those ghost hunter shows. Our biggest fear was the HOA getting mad about our lawn being half an inch too long. It started with Chloe's imaginary friend. She called him the Pale Man. Every kid has one, right? We didn't think anything of it. She'd say he was quiet and liked to watch her play. She said he lived in the crawl space. We just nodded and said, "That's nice, honey." Then the noises started. Not bumps in the night. We could have rationalized that. These were daytime noises. Soft, shuffling scrapes from above the ceiling tiles in the finished basement. A sound like dry skin rubbing against wood. We blamed it on the house settling, on squirrels. We called an exterminator. He found nothing. The dog knew. Baxter, the friendliest dog on earth, would sometimes stop dead in the hallway leading to Chloe's room. His hackles would rise, a low, continuous growl would rumble in his throat, and he'd stare at the closed door at the end of the hall, the door to the crawl space access. He'd whimper and back away, refusing to go down that hall. We thought it was a smell, maybe a dead mouse in the wall. The night it happened, it was a Tuesday. David was away at a conference. Chloe was asleep in her bed. I was in my office, finishing a project. The house was dead quiet. Then, I heard a thump from Chloe's room. Not a toy falling. A heavy, solid thump, like a sack of grain hitting the floor. My blood went cold. I crept down the hall, my heart in my throat. I pushed her door open slowly. Her nightlight was on, casting a soft glow. Chloe was sound asleep. But her closet door, which I always shut tight, was wide open. And the air, it was freezing. And it smelled. A coppery, stale smell, like old blood and dust. I walked in, intending to shut the closet. As I passed her bed, I glanced at the far wall. And I froze. There was a shadow on the wall that shouldn't have been there. It was cast by nothing in the room. It was the silhouette of a man, but impossibly thin, with limbs that seemed too long and spindly. And it wasn't standing. It was crawling, horizontal, from one side of the wall to the other, like a spider. Its head was tilted at a broken angle, watching Chloe's sleeping form. I screamed. Just a short, sharp gasp of pure terror. The shadow stopped. And then, with a jerky, insectal movement, it turned its head towards me. I saw the profile of a gaunt, elongated face. No eyes, just dark sockets. I snatched Chloe out of bed and ran. I locked us in the master bathroom, the only room without an attic hatch or crawl space access. That's when I called 911. I was sobbing, barely coherent. The operator kept asking, "Where's the intruder? Is he armed?" And I heard it then. From the other side of the bathroom door. A slow, dragging sound. And then a scratch. Long, deliberate, like a nail being drawn down the wood. Then another, higher up. Then another, near the top of the doorframe. It was climbing, scaling the wall outside the bathroom. I whispered into the phone, my voice shaking so hard I could barely form words. "He's not on the floor. He's climbing the wall. The Pale Man is climbing the wall." The police found nothing, of course. No forced entry, no footprints. Just a faint, sour smell in Chloe's room and 3 long, shallow scratches on the outside of the bathroom door, starting at waist height and ending near the ceiling. We moved out 2 weeks later. We left almost everything behind. Chloe doesn't talk about the pale man anymore. But sometimes, at night, she'll wake up screaming and point at the wall, sobbing that he's looking at her from the corner where the shadows are darkest. And I believe her. I believe every single impossible word. Because I saw him too. And a house is only a sanctuary if the walls are keeping things out, not in. The Miller family's ordeal forces us to question the very architecture of our safety. When a presence can defy gravity, can inhabit the bones of a building, where does one run? Their story remains a chilling testament to the horrors that can take root not in haunted forests, but in the plaster and drywall of a happy home. Story 3. The Sandshapers. James is a man of science, his world defined by strata, mineral composition, and millennial epochs. He sought silence and data. He found something that defied all his categories. What follows is his report, a clinical diary that slowly fractures into primal fear. I am a PhD in geological sciences. I deal in fact, in evidence you can hold in your hand, put under a microscope. I was on a 10-day solo mapping trip in a particularly remote basin. My goal was isotopic dating of some unique formations. My camp was a tent, my Jeep, and a satellite phone for weekly check-ins. The first 3 days were textbook. Heat, silence, the work. The first anomaly was the footprints. I woke on the 4th morning to find a single set of them circling my tent. They were humanoid, but the stride was enormous, easily 6 feet between impressions. The toes were indistinct, as if the feet were wrapped in some rough cloth. But the depth was all wrong. The sand was packed hard there. To make an imprint that clear, the thing that made them would have to weigh well over 400 pounds. I rationalized it. A trick of the wind, maybe a coyote with mange creating an odd pattern. I documented it with my camera and moved on. The second night, the sounds began. Not animal sounds. Not the yip of a fox or the scuttle of a lizard. It was a low, granular hiss, like sand pouring steadily onto a drumhead. It seemed to come from just beyond the ring of my firelight, moving in a slow circle around camp. I shone my high-powered flashlight into the darkness. Nothing. The beam would catch only the skeletal shapes of Joshua trees. But the moment the light moved, the hissing would resume from a new direction. It felt inquisitive. On the 6th day, I found the first sculpture. I'd hiked to a sandstone bluff. At its base, in a patch of fine, flat sand, was a structure. It was a perfect, spiraling ziggurat, about 2 feet high, made of individually stacked grains of sand. The precision was impossible. No wind could do this. No insect. Each grain seemed deliberately placed, and around it, in the soft sand, were more of those large, deep footprints. The hair on my neck stood up. This was intelligence. A silent, patient, artistic intelligence. That night, the hissing was closer. I saw a shape. I had my light trained on the perimeter. A dune, about 50 yards out, seemed to melt. The sand on its crest flowed upwards, defying gravity, and coalesced into a tall, thin silhouette. It had no discernible features, just a man-like shape composed of shifting, whispering grains. It stood there for a full minute, the sand constantly trickling down its form only to be pulled back up from the ground, a perpetual cycle. Then it simply collapsed back into the dune, as if it had never been. Panic, true scientific panic, set in. This violated everything. I packed my core samples in a frenzy, intent on leaving at first light. I didn't make it that far. As I worked by my Jeep's headlights, the hissing became a chorus. All around me. I looked up. They stood at the edge of the light. 4 of them, tall, maybe 7 feet, their bodies a turbulent, semi-solid mass of sand, their outlines shimmering in the heat, still bleeding from the ground. They had no eyes, but I felt a focused, collective gaze. A deep, subaudible vibration hummed in the air, resonating in my chest bone. One of them took a step forward. Its foot didn't lift. The sand flowed, reforming a leg in front of it. It raised an arm, a limb that elongated, stretching toward me. Not fast, not threateningly, but with a terrifying, gentle curiosity. It was going to touch me. I didn't think. I threw myself into the Jeep, ignition screaming, and tore across the desert floor in a blind fury, not caring about ravines or rocks. I drove through the night until the gas needle hit empty and the sun bleached the sky. I filed no official report. What would I say? I abandoned thousands of dollars of equipment. My colleagues think I had a heat stroke-induced breakdown. Maybe I did. But the samples I brought back, the sand from near that bluff, under an electron microscope, the quartz grains show patterns of fusion inconsistent with any natural process, as if they had been subjected to intense, localized heat and pressure, as if they had been shaped. The desert is not empty. It is inhabited by things that are as old as the stones they mold. They are the sand itself, awake and watching. And they are curious about the soft, wet things that walk, so briefly, upon their skin. James's encounter suggests an ecology of consciousness we cannot begin to chart. Entities not of flesh and blood, but of earth and element, whose motives are as inscrutable as the wind-sculpted stones of their domain. It begs a terrifying question. If the land itself can become aware, is there any true wilderness left for us to hide in? We descend now from the vast, sun-scorched desert into a world of perpetual twilight. The deep earth. For centuries, miners have told stories of the atomic knockers, of tapping in the dark, of unseen presences. Most are dismissed as superstition born of isolation and gas. But some accounts carry a weight, a specificity that stone cannot absorb. Story 4. The Keeper of the Vein. Carl Hendricks is a realist. He has faced cave-ins, gas leaks, and rock bursts. He respected the mountain, but he did not fear ghosts, until he met the thing that lived in the seam of pitch black number 9. This is his testimony. I was a faceman. That means I worked the coal seam at the very end of the tunnel, where the air is thin and the earth's breath is hot and close. The mountain, we called it. You learn its sounds. The creak of timbers, the drip of water, the crunch of your own boots on slag. You get a feel for when it's holding its breath. This was in '83. We were pushing a new drift, following a rich vein my granddaddy had charted. We called it the mother lode. But the old-timers, they'd just shake their heads when they saw the direction. They'd mutter about the old deeps, places that were mined out a century ago and sealed up for a reason. The first sign was the carvings. We broke through into a section of the seam that wasn't coal. It was shale, but it was carved, not with tools. It looked like something had dragged huge, powerful claws down the wall in parallel lines, over and over, deep grooves taller than a man. Between them were patterns, spirals, knots, things that looked like eyes. They were ancient, covered in a patina of black dust. This wasn't natural, and it sure as hell wasn't made by any miner. Then the smells changed. Normally, you smell rock dust, coal, maybe a bit of diesel from the machinery back down the line. This was different. A wet, clay smell, like the bottom of a deep well. And underneath it, something rancid, like spoiled meat in a damp cellar. My partner, Mikey, he laughed it off, called it dead air. But he stopped laughing when the picks went missing. We'd set our tools down, turned to set a charge, and they'd be gone. Not fallen, gone. We found them later, stacked neatly in a corner of a side passage we swore hadn't been there before. The steel heads were ice cold, colder than the surrounding rock, and covered in a slick, gray mucus. The mountain started talking, not with knocks, with breathing. You'd be working in a pocket of silence, and then you'd hear it. A long, wet, drawn-in inhalation from the solid rock wall beside you. Then a slow, shuddering exhale. It wasn't air moving. It was something in the rock, breathing it like it was water. The day it showed itself, Mikey and I were setting final supports. The lights on our helmets were the only thing holding back a darkness so absolute it felt solid. I was driving a bolt into the ceiling when I saw Mikey freeze. His face, under the cold dust, went white as chalk. He was staring past me, down the drift we'd just carved. I turned. It was standing where the wall met the roof, crouched in a space no man could fit into. It wasn't a cave-in shadow. It had substance. It was the color of wet clay and old coal, its skin glistening in my headlamp like it was seeping moisture. It was vaguely man-shaped, but its limbs were too long, its joints bending the wrong way, allowing it to brace itself between the walls like a spider. It had no eyes I could see, just deep, dark sockets. But its mouth a wide, lipless gash that opened slowly. It didn't make a sound. It just presented itself. And with that open mouth, I saw a rows of teeth not like an animal's, but like shards of crystalline rock, black and sharp. And I understood. It wasn't a ghost. It was a thing that lived in the stone. A custodian. And we were drilling into its home. It moved then, not toward us, but into the wall. It pressed itself against the coal seam and just sank. The rock didn't break. It flowed like thick liquid around the thing, swallowing it whole. The last thing to vanish was that open mouth, and for a second, I heard a sound that wasn't a sound, a deep, subsonic hum that vibrated in my teeth and bones. We got out of there. Didn't run, but we walked fast, real fast. We told the foreman we hit a bad gas pocket. They sealed that drift a week later. Officially, it was geologically unstable. Mikey never went underground again. Took a job topside and died of a stroke 5 years later. I kept mining, but I never took a face that deep again. I've thought about it every day for 40 years. We weren't digging up fuel. We were digging up something's house. And I looked it right in its stony face. Some men are afraid of the dark. I'm not. I'm afraid of what's been living in it, down in the weight of the world, long before we ever thought to bring a light down there. Carl Hendricks's story forces us to look downward with dread. It suggests a biosphere of impossible life, a geology that is not inert, but inhabited. The keeper of the vein does not haunt the mind. It is the mind, a silent landlord collecting a rent of terror from those who disturb its age-old slumber. Our final story returns us to the surface world, but to a place where reality itself has worn thin. There are locations on this earth that feel wrong, not haunted, but wounded, where the laws of nature seem to stutter. Story 5. The Glade Where Time Bled. Leo Vance is a meticulous man. He needed to be. Lives depended on his clarity. What he experienced during a solo hiking trip in the remote Ozark Mountains shattered that clarity forever. It was not an encounter with a creature, but with a location, a living, breathing anomaly. This is his report. I am, by profession and temperament, a cartographer of the sky. I deal in known points, vectors, and clearances. My hobby was hiking, for the same reason. Clear trails, marked maps, a defined destination. I sought order. In the autumn of 2019, I sought the solitude of the Buffalo National River backcountry, armed with a topographical map, a GPS, and a satellite messenger. I was following a faint game trail, checking my GPS every half hour. The readings were precise. Then, at precisely 3:17 p.m., according to my watch and my phone, my GPS began to drift. The coordinates flickered. My position jumped 300 yards east, then back, then south. I chalked it up to canopy interference, though the pines here weren't that thick. That's when I saw the glade. It was a perfect, circular clearing about 50 yards across, hidden in a hollow. The sunlight hit it differently. It wasn't the warm gold of the late afternoon forest. It was a pale, silvery light, diffuse, sourceless, like the light on an overcast day, but the sky above was clear and blue. The air was utterly still. No wind, no insect hum, no bird call. The silence was a physical pressure on my eardrums. I felt a wave of nausea, a sudden, intense vertigo. Not dizziness, but a feeling of tilt, as if the world had shifted a few degrees on an axis I couldn't see. I stepped into the glade. The first wrong thing was the temperature. It dropped at least 20 degrees. My breath fogged. The second was the sound of my footsteps. They didn't make a crunch. They made a damp, hollow thump, as if the ground was frozen solid underneath a thin layer of moss and fallen leaves. I took out my compass. The needle wasn't pointing north. It was spinning in a slow, lazy circle. My watch, a digital and an analog backup, both began running backward. The digital numbers cascaded backwards through time. The analog hands swept counterclockwise. My phone was dead, not just out of battery, but cold and utterly unresponsive. Then I saw the shadows. They were wrong. The trees at the edge of the glade cast long shadows, but they didn't point away from the light. They pointed in multiple, contradictory directions, some stretching towards the center of the clearing, some twisting around the tree trunks like serpents. It was visually sickening, a violation of fundamental physics. I heard a voice, my own voice. It whispered from behind me, "Turn around." But it was my voice from 10 years ago, younger, strained with a stress I remembered from a specific, terrible shift at the tower. I spun. Nothing. Then, from my left, my own laughter from my daughter's wedding day. Pure joy, echoing in this dead, cold space. It was followed by a sob I'd stifled at my father's funeral. My life was being played back to me, out of order, disembodied. Panic, pure and algorithmic, set in. You are in an unreachable grid square. Your instruments are compromised. You are lost. I tried to run back the way I came. The tree line seemed to shift. I'd sprint towards it and find myself back in the center of the glade, facing the opposite direction, my own spectral whispers swirling around me. I was trapped in a loop, a glitch in the landscape. I don't know how I finally broke free. I fell to my knees, closed my eyes against the twisting shadows, and focused on a single, physical sensation, the feel of the frigid, spongy ground under my palms. I crawled. I didn't look up. I crawled by touch alone, ignoring the whispers, the echoes of my own life. I crawled until the cold vanished, and the normal sound of leaves under my hands returned. I was half a mile from where I'd entered, according to my now-functioning GPS. 4 hours had passed. The sun was setting. I have never spoken of this to my family. They wouldn't understand. But I've researched. There are a handful of similar accounts from that region. A place where electronics fail, where time doesn't flow linearly, where the land reflects not what is, but what was and could be. I didn't encounter a monster. I walked into a scar, a place where the map of reality is torn and something else bleeds through. I chart skies for a living, but I know now there are places on the ground that no map can ever truly capture because they don't exist in a way that fits on a grid. They exist in the cracks between. Leo Vance's experience brings our journey to a close not with a creature, but with a concept far more terrifying, a broken place. From the intelligent fog of the forest to the invasive silence in the home, the conscious desert, the living mine, and finally to the glitch in the glade. Each story is a fracture in our understanding. These are not mere ghost stories. They are testimonies from the front lines of a reality that is far stranger, far older, and far more dangerous than our modern world dares to admit. These 5 witnesses, the trucker, the mother, the geologist, the miner, the controller, they come from different walks of life, but they share a common thread, an unshakable conviction born of lived, traumatic truth. They looked into the abyss, and it was not empty. It was inhabited, intelligent, and often indifferent to our screams. This is why we listen. This is why we keep the lights on at Nightbound Bloodline. To give voice to these whispers from the dark, to chart, however faintly, the shifting borders of the known world. If you have a story of your own, a line you've crossed, a thing you've seen that cannot be explained, we invite you to share it in the comments below. Your account may be the next thread we follow into the shadows. If you found yourself holding your breath tonight, if the world outside your window seems just a little less familiar, then we have done our job. Please help us continue this exploration. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a descent into the unknown. For tonight, our journey ends here. This has been Nightbound Bloodline. Thank you for listening. Until next time, sleep with one eye open. The end.